listening to My Brain is a Wonderland, the podcast for neurodivergent women and the people who love them. You're here today with your host, Emily, and I just wanted to start off by saying thank you so much for all of the support that I've been getting. It's really heartwarming when I see all of your reviews and people who are following me on social media, messaging me, emailing me, and I just want to say thank you for your support. And if you haven't already liked, rated, reviewed, followed this podcast, if you like what you're listening to, I really encourage you to do that. It doesn't take any time at all. On Spotify, you just hit the 5-star. And on Apple, you can leave a written review, or you can just hit the 5 stars on there. I'd really appreciate it. It's going to help me reach more people like you, build this community, and get my voice out there and my story. And that's what I really want from all of this, is to connect with more people like you and get more stories out there like this that are not heard as much. I also wanted to remind everybody to follow me on my social media. I do put little tidbits on there, kind of short form content that is not like a podcast, just giving little bits of information about things that I'm working through, struggling with, educating myself on. It's also a great way to stay connected because I thought last month I was going to be at DragonCon in Atlanta. I was scheduled to do a panel on disabilities in fandom there, and actually it ended up not working out because I had to evacuate my house in Florida because of Hurricane Idalia a couple of days before. And I posted after the fact. I couldn't before. I just didn't have the ability to because we were evacuating. But I did post after the fact that I was sad I couldn't be there and why I couldn't be there. And so it's a great way just to stay connected with what's going on with me and the podcast, and maybe find some other people like you who are also following me. So let's get to this episode. Today, I'm going to be talking about my career in journalism. I know I've been saying a lot in previous episodes that I was a journalist. I say in my show notes I'm an ex-journalist. It's all true, but I haven't spoken about it that much because I haven't done it full-time in a really long time. I've been writing for various different jobs that I've done, press releases, web content, articles, but I haven't done it full-time in a long time, and there's a reason for that I haven't done it. And so I just wanted to kind of talk about this particular job because I was very passionate about it and ended up abandoning it somewhat. Very ADHD of me. But I wanted to talk about it because people are often asking, what are good jobs for ADHD? What are bad jobs for ADHD? And I think actually journalism is a good job for ADHD. I am going to talk about the struggles that I had and why I ended up leaving the industry. But if you are wanting to or currently pursuing writing and journalism and you have ADHD and or autism, this isn't going to be a I discourage you episode at all. This is going to be an I encourage you episode. I think anyone with neurodivergency can be a journalist if they want to work at it, whether they have the innate talent or they want to learn the skill, as long as they have the passion for it. But I just want to give you some insight into what my experience was. And of course, this is based on 20 to 15 years ago, so the landscape has really changed. And there's lots of different positions in the journalism and writing industry. So I just want to give you my perspective and how I got there and how being neurodivergent affected how I approached it and enjoyed it or didn't enjoy it. I also want to preface this episode with, you've heard a lot of me talking about different careers on this podcast, that I wanted to be an artist at this age, I wanted to be a dancer at this age, I wanted to be this, I wanted to be that, I was committed to this. It's gonna seem like it may seem like, that I was saying at 16 I wanted to be an artist, but I also wanted to be this, and I also wanted to be that. That's just having ADHD, dudes. I have an uncanny ability to believe I can do anything, do a lot of research on it, have the fantasy, completely commit to it, really think that I'm going to do it and say, you are going to do this, and then completely dump it. So I don't want you to think that, I'm not truthful when I say that I want to be this then and this that. When I was 19 and in my first year of college, maybe spent the first 6 months of college convinced that I was going to be a tattoo artist in America. That's how I was going to get to America. I spent most nights in my dorm either watching American Dad, same episodes on repeat because we didn't have streaming back then, it was just whatever you downloaded, and researching how to be a tattoo apprentice in the US, where the best places were to apprentice, how I could get a visa, studying it, researching where I was going to get my first tattoo. I'm still not tattooed, so probably wouldn't be a good tattoo artist. But I just want you to know that this is a really common aspect of having ADHD, is that you jump around a lot and are super committed. And part of the difficulty some of us have is follow through. And so I just want to talk about that. I did follow through on the journalism thing. I didn't follow through on some other stuff that I've talked about. I talked about in the Dream episode about not following through on being an artist. And so I just wanted to, kind of preface that I jump around a lot, but this story will encompass it all. So it started a long, long time ago when I was a child living with ADHD and autism and I didn't know it, and was being raised by someone who probably has ADHD and or autism. I was obsessed with books growing up. Absolutely obsessed with reading. I could devour a book in a couple of hours. And growing up poor, if you've listened to this podcast before, you know that I grew up pretty impoverished with a single mom in government housing. And the way we would devour books, my mom as well, was so quick and frequent that we really couldn't afford to buy all these books. Even if you were getting them secondhand at a charity shop, we couldn't afford to have, 2 books a day, 14 books a week for 2 people. Maybe that was in the summer holidays, but really, we would on Sundays sometimes just lay in bed and devour books. And so we took advantage of the library system. And if you don't take advantage of that, you really should. They have comics nowadays for adults. They have lots of different books. I get a lot of online books. You can just have them downloaded to your cell phone, so you don't even need to go to the library except to set up your card. So I really recommend it. But I was basically obsessed with books and fell in love with the library, fell in love with English, fell in love with reading. And I decided when I was quite young, I don't even really remember saying this, I must have been maybe under 8, under 7, that I wanted to be a librarian. And that was my first kind of foray into a literature career, deciding that I love the art of literature and I want to be involved in it. And so as it went on, my childhood, what I wanted to do, and I don't even know how this came up, where it came from. I want to say it's common, but I don't think it is common. I think maybe just in my artistic family it seemed that way. In the 90s and 80s, 70s, I don't know, I wasn't alive then. In the 90s, you could send poetry to presses, places that publish books, and have it published in an anthology of poetry. So an anthology is a poetry book that no one wrote, it's just all different poems by all different people. And this was something that we knew we could do. You would just send off a poem to this press, and then they would write back to you and say, yep, it was published, and here's the book it was published in. You didn't get paid, nothing like that. And I started doing this maybe when I was around 8 years old, and they especially love child authors because they could put next to the name of the author, 8 years old, 11, and it seems kind of like, oh, that's so crazy cool. And I got published in a few anthologies, and I own them. I don't have them with me, they're with my family that I'm estranged from. But I did that throughout my childhood. Probably from, like I said, around 7 or 8, through to around 13, 14, when I sent off a poem about the Titanic sinking. I'd done some historical research at school or something, wrote a poem, sent that off, got that published, and that was like my final one that I did. And I really got this kind of publishing bug at that time. If you publish or have ever been published, it's really exciting to see your name in a byline. It's really exciting to see that. Maybe it's an ADHD thing too, that kind of short-term achievement, that you did something, it gets published, and your name is there, and then you do another one. You know, it's kind of a short project that you do, and I found that really exciting. And so my childhood goes on, I'm writing these poems, getting them published, thinking I'm going to be a librarian or something. Maybe around, I'm going to say 9 to 11, because it's really hard to pinpoint, I'm not sure. But I had always been doing a lot of performance art, acting, dancing. I always was doing that, and so the arts in general were a big part of my life growing up, and I think I was feeling a call to the performance. And I remember seeing a newsreader on TV, and in the UK, newsreaders, and I think they are especially in the US if they're local, you kind of get obsessed with your local newsreader. But in the UK, the national newsreader is really a big deal. We have the BBC, it's publicly sponsored, you pay to have it, there's no ads, everyone watches it, everyone knows these newsreaders, right? You watch them twice a day, every single day, as a family, you just did. And one day I said, I want to be a newsreader. And my mom said, well, a newsreader is actually a journalist. It's like if you say you want to be a weather person, and you find out actually weather people are meteorologists. You think they're kind of these performing puppet kind of people, but they actually have a lot of skill, intelligence. Especially local journalists research all of their own stuff. They, you know, when you see a journalist on the beat outside, they wrote what they're saying, they went out, were running around with their one camera person to find the story, film the story. It's really intense. I don't know if the national newsreaders write their own stuff. I'm guessing no. But they still were at one point very serious journalists, and, you know, still are as a newsreader, but were journalists who researched and wrote their own stuff and presented their own stuff. And so my mom said, you know, well, they're a journalist. And that's really when I started to commit myself to writing a lot and the art of journalism. I remember one year for Christmas, I got this box that was like make your own newspaper. So there were all these pages that looked like a newspaper with boxes and columns, and then you had to fill them in and stuff. And I think I hand wrote them, because you didn't have a printer back then. You didn't even have a computer. So you hand write on this paper and stick and glue and all that stuff. I joined the school newspaper. I don't remember if I wrote during elementary school. In England, you go from primary, middle, straight to high school. So I went to high school when I was like 11 or 12. So when I got to high school, I started writing for the newspaper. And I really thought this was what I was going to do. Like, I really, you know, was committed to this, was loving it. It was lots of short and sharp things. That's why I liked journalism at the time. You could write an article real quick, research it, get so totally obsessed with it, write it, publish, see your name, and then move on to the next. So I was really enjoying that. And then around the age of 13, I saw an ad, or an article in the local newspaper, the Harrow Observer, and I think it was a daily newspaper, the Harrow Observer, based on my hometown, Harrow. It's the London Borough of Harrow in northwest London. And they said, we're looking for they probably said kids, teens, something, under the age of, it was like 18 or 16 or something, and we want you to write an article about an older family member and what their life was like in the past. Kind of like an oral history of an older family member. Well, my mom is only 19 years older than me, so she wasn't really old enough, really, because really we'd be talking about stuff 10 years prior, because you gotta remember some stuff, so she'd be talking about stuff from age 10 onwards, which would be like late 70s, kind of 80s, and this was like the 90s. So my mom said, you should ask Granddad. Granddad is her dad, and he grew up in Wales, in Pontypridd, which is, I believe, a village, a town, very small. And he had, man, I don't know how to put it. I was going to say an eclectic childhood, but I feel like you say that word when you had like a good childhood. He had like a really interesting working class childhood. And so I decided I was going to write about him, and he told me all about being a mod, which is like a quote-unquote gang member from the 50s and 60s, I guess. Kind of like Grease, but not really. They had the same ducky haircut. It's called a ducky because the back of your hair looks like a duck's butt, by the way. And they had the suede top shoes and the really skinny ties. And my grandfather said that he was in a gang, which it didn't sound like a very intense gang, let me tell you that, but a gang in Pontypridd where they would go bowling against other gangs. I cannot imagine what a bowling alley in the 60s in Pontypridd looked like, but, oh man. But he basically was in a gang that rivaled Tom Jones's gang. So Tom Jones, the famous singer, is from Pontypridd, Wales, and my grandfather bowled against him in whatever this bizarro gang was. And I wrote this story and submitted it to the newspaper, and they called up my mom and told her that I had won the competition. The prize was getting this story published in the local newspaper, in addition to having a photo of me and my grandfather. The big prize was that I would get to spend 1 week doing work experience, like an internship, with the newspaper as a journalist. So I arranged the work experience. I forget, when I got it and then how long. It was probably a few months because I'd have to tell school, I'm going to be out for a week. Sorry, suckers. Or maybe I did it in summer school. Oh, maybe I did it in the summer holidays. Yeah, I think I might have done it during the summer because summer is a bit dead for news. And I remember some journalists saying that, like it's going to be a bit dead while you're here. But I remember I'd been to the office before. Because I had tried to get, when I was a kid, I was just a tenacious, crazy kid, man. And I remember doing a community sale in elementary school when I was 7 or 8, and then I dragged my friends to the local newspaper so they could put it in the, community events page. This is what you did before the internet, guys. You went to freaking local newspapers. But I'd only seen the front door, walked into the lobby. And this time I was being walked into the whole thing. And it looked just like, if you've seen All the President's Men, about the guys who wrote about Deep Throat and Nixon, God, I was gonna say someone else just then. If you've seen any movie, Superman, any Superman movie, when he's, at the Daily Planet, I mean, it's really what it looks like, is this very expansive one room. The editors, the important people, have an office. Each have an office. Mine had there were a few offices. This was back in the 90s, newspapers were big, man. I don't even think this newspaper exists anymore, and if it did, the office would be tiny. But I'm telling you, my desk alone, it was a huge desk. So I'm jumping ahead because of my ADHD. But basically the room was huge, and there were all these giant desks with people sat around. And the desk I was at was like a huge dining table, with 10 to 15 people, all with their own computer, but you're right next to each other and right opposite each other. And at the head of the desk is your sub-editor, and then the big editors were in their own office. And it was very bustly, very loud, very bright, very exciting, and it's really what you would see in the movies, and was very cool. Sensory overload, I'm realizing now, but was kind of I've made it. I'm here. I'm in the frickin' newsroom, baby. And I just thought, well, it's just a hop, skip, and a jump to the BBC from here, So I'm 13 years old, and I start going out on trips with journalists from this newspaper. So really, especially in the summer, when there's nothing going on, you're trying to find your own stuff. And we had a tip line, and we'd call up, they'd have me, like, call up the firefighters. There was a media line for the firefighting department, and they would tell you, like, oh, this house burned down, oh, people died, oh, this criminal did this, whatever, and then you'd make a story out of it. But I remember two particular stories, and we went on the bus. I mean, this is so London and so journalism. I mean, you see in the American movies, like, get in the car, let's go. We were like, let's wait for a bus, jump on it, and we'll figure it out. So, took a bus to the next town over, and apparently there was a dog on the loose. A stray dog that, I don't know, had been biting people or terrorizing people. And this journalist, who was, an adult in their 20s, wanted me to knock on people's doors, like strangers' doors, and just say, hey, have you heard about this dog? I'm looking to get quotes, blah, blah, blah. And thank God, when I knocked on doors with this journalist, no one opened the door. I mean, no one opened the door. Thank God. And that I found very difficult to deal with. And I think that's not my ADHD here. I think it's my autism. The social anxiety, the coming out of my shell, the making small talk, the connecting emotionally with people. I have an auditory processing disorder, so in this whole thing, I'm having to listen to what they say and write it down. Very difficult to do. And I was just like, oh, thank God no one, opened their door. Well, when we were in the same town, the journalist also wanted us to investigate another story. And it was something to do with, they're going to do something to the downtown or the high street, is what we call it in the UK. The local council or government is going to do something that, maybe the residents don't like. So let's interview them. Literally, we went into a local Woolworths in Wealdstone, Harrow and Wealdstone. Anyone, if you're listening from London, this is where it was. And went into a Woolworths, and the journalist literally said, just approach people. Like, people, I remember standing in the gift card, where you found birthday cards and Christmas cards, all that kind of thing. And people just looking for a card to give their wife, their mother, their husband, their daughter, son, whatever. And going, excuse me, I am from my name is Emily Henderson, I'm from the Harrow Observer. I'm 13 years old. And I was just wondering if you had any opinions on blah, 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 blah. 9 times out of 10, they would go, no, thank you, or no, just ignore me. It was the most awkward, horrible thing. I really didn't enjoy it, and this was an aspect of the news beat that I just couldn't get down with ever. This kind of having to approach people I didn't know, and you see it in movies, and it's not far off, where you see young upstart journalists chasing people. Hey, can I talk to you? Can I really, and that's really how it was. You had to be very assertive with strangers. You had to listen to what they say and be able to ask the right questions. And I just didn't think, I just couldn't really do it. It was very, very difficult. Another thing that I struggled with while on the news beat is that they have very strict deadlines. So this is a newspaper that goes out every single day. And every single day, they're kind of saying, like, okay, we need this, we need to fill this space, you need this done by 4 p.m., by 3 p.m., whatever. This isn't like a story that you've been working on for months about how, some senator has been doing this skeezy thing and you've been collecting evidence. These are like short, quick pieces that need to be done literally overnight, and I found that very stressful. Not only very stressful, but I can either be focused on something or not focused on something, and if I don't want to be focused on it, I'm probably not going to focus on it. And that's a problem for work, when you need to focus on something even when you don't want to. So after this, I was still super into the idea of being a journalist, even though looking back, that aspect all those aspects I discussed I didn't enjoy. I moved into, I guess I was already in high school. At 13, you start like 11, 12 in high school in the UK. And so I was already in high school, and in your, I want to say third year, which would be 14 to 15, you do 1 or 2 weeks, I can't remember now, of what they call work experience, which is basically an internship with a company that you're interested in, but you're kind of treated like a real employee because they want you to get the idea of what it would be like to work in a real industry. They're trying to prepare you for the real world, basically. And what you can do is you can either pick one from what the school proposes. So the school's like, hey, we got this really shitty internship with this local automotive place that will have you be on the phones for a week. Like, I mean, really just like, ugh. And so I decided, I knew this was coming up, and I have an obsessive personality and a far-out planning personality. I think because I've struggled with both of those, so I'm obsessive about it. But I decided a year before I was going to start looking into my own work experience. And I knew that the teen magazines that I read, Just 17 and Sugar, both offered internships that you could do a week's work experience. They had it when you folded over the cover with all of the addresses and everything. They had a little blurb that said, if you're interested in work experience or an internship, right here, blah, 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 whatever. So I did that. I wrote to Just 17 and Sugar. Please bear in mind, this is 1999, 2000. They didn't have emails. Like, it wasn't standard back then. You had to write a letter to a person and wait for a response. Maybe even put in a post-addressed envelope in there so they would actually respond to you. And you could be waiting months, and you're just kind of like, okay. And actually what ended up happening is months later, I got a letter back from Sugar magazine, and I'd gotten a week-long internship. And it was just off Oxford Street, love Oxford Street. I would go there all the time to shop, and it was just off of there. And man, was it a shell shock. I remember going there thinking, like the local newspaper, I'm going to be writing articles and things about people. I don't know. That wasn't it. The first thing they had me do for about, 3 or 4 hours was doing photocopies. I don't even remember what I was photocopying, but I feel like nowadays they would have sent it as a PDF in an email. I think I was photocopying multiple things to distribute to people in the office, like a memo, but now you just wouldn't do that. Other things I did was running things to offices. So I would run photo proofs to offices, which again now would be done by email. I remember a very specific job where I was sent to Hamleys on Regent Street, and Hamleys is a very big toy store, very fancy. It's kind of like the Harrods of toys. And I was sent there to go get a Spice Girls doll. I forget which one, but this magazine would do little kind of comic books, not stop motion because it's a magazine, but like comic books made out of, like Barbie dolls. And so they needed an extra Spice Girls doll, and I had to just go get it right then because they were doing the shoot right then. I mean, really ridiculous runner stuff that I feel like now email has completely solved. I don't think you could solve the grabbing the Spice Girls doll, but maybe in London you could get a Spice Girls doll couriered to you from Amazon in like 2 hours. I bet you could. So that was kind of my big foray into international or national exciting journalism. Over the next few years, though, and if you've listened to my Dream episode a couple of episodes ago, I really started falling into my art from the age of like 14 to 16 or 17. I thought I was going to be an artist. I thought I was going to be an animator. I really didn't know what I was going to do, but that's what I thought. And then listen to the Dream episode, and it'll tell you everything you need to know about why I ended up dropping the art dream. But I basically recommitted to journalism, and I knew I was going to take a year off between high school and college. So I was going to take from 18 to 19, I wasn't going to go to college right away, I was going to take a year off. The real dream was I wanted to write for the Buffy magazine. I mean, I don't know if anyone remembers this, how TV shows used to have, like, actual magazines. And the crew was really small, but man, I cannot imagine being in the heyday of journalism, like physical journalism, in the 90s. And you can just, like, be making money writing about Buffy, like, and interviewing the actor. Okay, whatever. It was going to be that, or I wanted to work for Empire magazine, which is a very famous film magazine that is still around. I can't believe they still even print it. But I think it's kind of a collector's thing now. It's like $15 to buy this magazine per month. But I used to buy Empire, like, all the time. So I took this year off, and I decided I was going to save up a bunch of money. I was working at Blockbuster at the time. Maybe I'll do an episode about that, just because that was an amazing experience in my life. And I was working at Blockbuster Video. I became the assistant manager, and I saved up a bunch of money and knew I was going to go abroad. Traveling was always one of my big dreams as well. And I decided I was going to do a journalism internship abroad. And I ended up going to China for about 4 months when I think I turned 19 on the trip. And I lived in Shanghai. It was an incredible city. I haven't been back since, and I'm so desperate to. We were gonna go, me and my husband, in 2020. We moved back to Florida in 2019, and we're planning to go back to China in 2020, and we all know how that went, and it didn't happen, and we haven't been back since. But I really want to go back there. That's another big dream of mine. But I basically got an internship at a magazine called That's Shanghai. I believe they're still around. It's a very famous magazine in China. They have That's Beijing as well, and maybe That's Guangzhou, That's Suzhou. I'm not sure. And I also wrote for a travel guide that they produced, so I did a bunch of feature articles for that and did a bunch of research. And I absolutely loved certain aspects of it. Because it wasn't a daily newspaper, the deadlines were longer. Also, the office, you weren't allowed to talk to anybody. I mean, what a dream. Because certain people, you didn't know whenever anyone was going to be focusing on an article. So they would have you DM people. Probably through AIM back then. AOL, I'm not even sure. I forget how we did it. But you would basically, I was sitting across from people and I would be talking to them by typing. Because they didn't want you talking out loud. But what I really, really struggled with, again, was the interview aspect. I didn't have to go onto the street and interview people randomly, but I still had to, multiple times a day, go and meet strangers and kind of try to draw them out, you know? It was my job to make them feel comfortable and to draw out their passion. And because I was so awkward and a little bit wooden and didn't really know what to say, I made them uncomfortable, and then it was just uncomfortable. You know when you see amazing interviewers, Sean on First We Feast, Anderson Cooper, Stephen Colbert, when you see people who know how to interview, and I'm so sad I only named men just then, it's, just speaks to the climate, doesn't it? Katie Couric, you know, Lisa Ling. When you see good interviewers, you know it, and you know that the interview is exciting, robust, and informative, and I just couldn't draw that out of people. I was uncomfortable, they were uncomfortable, and the interview was really stilted, so then the article would be stilted, because it didn't have anything in it with any substance, right? I'm not one of these people who could meet, you know, Mariah Carey, Britney Spears, Brad Pitt, and get them to tell me their life story, to get them to open up. I just don't think I'd be able to do that, really. But I did still love the magazine industry and still felt like I was committed to it, even though I struggled with that aspect. I went to university after I got back from Shanghai. I really struggled with executive dysfunction the entire time I was in college. In England, it's 3 years unless you do some extended thing. But it was 3 years, and even though I was struggling, I did really well because, you know, ADHD, like, you just kind of pull through in the end oftentimes, and that's not to say that you will all the time. But sometimes you can just be like, oh, I showed up, I did it, I kicked ass. If you've listened to some of my other episodes, you'd know that I was an exchange student in the US during college. And during that time, I haven't spoken about this before, I don't think, but during that time, I wrote for NVR magazine, also from China. That magazine was basically the Chinese version of The Week. They were trying to be like the non-Western version of The Week. And because back then, you didn't really get spoilers from movies and TV, even though the internet was around, it wasn't like you knew immediately, oh, this guy died, that's what's happening, this is the story plot. So I wrote the film and TV recaps of American shows and movies for expats who were living in China and Asia. So if you were living in China and Asia and the Avengers had come out and you wanted to know what it was about, but you weren't going to have it in the movie theaters for months, you couldn't get any information online because it just wasn't like that back then, I would do a little snippet in this magazine. And I did that for a year while I lived in America and was very supported by the editor. He was the same editor I had at that Shanghai when I lived in Shanghai, and he was really supporting me, wanting to push me into journalism, said, you've lived abroad, you've written in the UK, you now live in the US, you're an international writer. You need to push this. You need to capitalize on what you're doing. And honestly, I didn't. I really was struggling with the executive dysfunction, whatever, was struggling, and didn't push to where I could have pushed to. I was at UC Berkeley for my exchange. I was on a full ride scholarship. I could have written for their newspaper, which would have been a big deal. American, big college newspapers are big deals. They break stories. They are a big experience. That would have been a big deal, and I just couldn't get there when I was at an exchange student. It was really difficult to deal with all these things when you, move to another country. But basically, when I had been an exchange student, I met my boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband of 15, 17 years. And so I wanted to go back to the US. When I graduated, I had to go back to England for my final year to graduate. And when I graduated, I wanted to go back to the US. So I looked into these visas, and I knew I could get a visa if I could get an internship. So you get a 3-month visa, and then I figured we were going to get married. We kind of discussed it. So I actually ended up getting an internship with the Potrero View, which is a newspaper in San Francisco. At the time, I'm not positive, but I'm pretty sure, back then, the Potrero View was, I'm going to say up and coming, but up and coming in 20 years. It was very socially divided. It was kind of sleepy, a bit scary in places, a little industrial. But now is kind of ooh, we've gentrified it a little bit. I'm pretty sure I've read about that. Maybe don't quote me, though. But I was really loving working for them when I could write about the arts. So the Frida Kahlo traveling exhibit, came to San Francisco. Frida Kahlo is one of my favorite artists. And I visited it and wrote about it, and the editor loved my piece. He didn't edit it at all and published it as is and absolutely loved it. But then he also wanted me to do community pieces. And I actually ended up knocking on the door of some little old lady, and she knew I was coming, so it wasn't super random, but she knew I was coming. I'd never met her. She invited me into her kitchen, and I sat at her kitchen while I interviewed her. And literally, I have a blackout from the interview. I remember knocking on the door, I remember walking in, and I remember sitting, I can visualize it now, I can remember sitting at her dining table. I can't remember anything after that. I blacked out. It was so traumatic for me, and I don't know if that sounds dramatic, but I don't like to talk to strangers. I don't mind talking to strangers in a prescribed context. So if the social context has been established, for example, you're a retail worker, I don't mind being very assertive and saying, hello, where is this dress in this size I'm looking for? I'm very comfortable with that. I am not comfortable starting up a conversation with somebody about their personal life while I have to personally relate to them. I found that very difficult. And that was kind of the beginning of the end for me with that. I did end up, a few months after that, joining my dance training program that then became my career for most of my 20s and early 30s, being an adult education instructor with some nonprofit work mixed in there because of the economic crash that we experienced and moving around. I did write for healthline.com, I wrote for some blogs, but back then, I'm telling you, even in the early 2000s, it was difficult to make a career as a freelancer back then. The internet was not as big. You couldn't just get any job anywhere. And even if you could, they really wanted a quick turnaround, which I really struggle with, because it depends on my mood, or what I'm interested in. If you say, hey, can you do a one-day turnaround on this article about Frida Kahlo? Sure. Absolutely. Can you do a one-day turnaround on an article about a car? Probably not. Probably not, dude. That's the honest truth. I probably couldn't. And that's really why I ended up leaving the industry, was this combination of I didn't like interviews, deadlines were complicated, and there wasn't a big freelance career establishment back then. And so I went in a different direction and went into performing arts and adult education. But I have been doing writing over the years, like I said, for all the jobs I've been doing. So I've done press releases, web content, I've written articles for my current job. I work for a global corporation, and I've written stuff for them recently. And if you've listened to my Dream episode, the 2 episodes prior, I've talked about how I'm going to write a book. I'm going to write a book once I graduate from my master's program in the spring. It's the fall right now, so I have this semester and next semester. I'm going to start writing my book. And I already have some essays already collected, just from over the years. As I've been a writer, I've just wanted to write stuff down. And I really want it to be a collection of essays a la Roxane Gay, Joan Didion, really commenting on the female experience, the mental health experience, the neurodivergent experience, the experience having your family estranged, the experience living in poverty. I really want to speak to those aspects, and I know I can, and I know I have the talent and skill to do it, and the determination to make it real. So, really, it's come back again. Writing, as you've heard, has been an interest and passion of mine since I was a child. And it's one of those hyperfixations that comes around. You lose the plot and then you're like, oh, it's back again. And again, I just want to say, if you are pursuing journalism as a career, or you're wanting to, I hope you got some perspective from this episode, but also don't get a negative vibe from this. I don't want you to think you need to dump your career because you have ADHD and or autism because you're pursuing journalism. It is actually a perfect career for being neurodivergent if you just get it working for you. And remember, any job is still a job, right? Even your most passionate job is gonna have days where you're like, okay, well, forget this. This is crap, It's just what it is. So I hope this gave you some perspective on this particular career for ADHD. Please reach out to me if you have any comments or would like to explore this topic further. You can find it all in the show notes, where you can find me on social media and my Gmail, but it's pretty much My Brain is a Wonderland everywhere. And I hope to see you again on the next episode of My Brain is a Wonderland, Season 2.